Hello, I am sharing with you some strategies for teaching through visual art, referred to as visual thinking strategies. And basically, this first slide is sharing with you some of the benefits around planning, comparing, comprehending, evaluating, writing, presenting, researching, and brainstorming that visual thinking strategies have been associated with for student learning. This is also an approach that's been used with many different subject areas and across really every age group. So if you want to see more of this, go to VTS, as in Visual Thinking Strategies.org, and I'm going to share with you some examples from my own teaching. So this is our second slide, and this is basically a work of ceramics. Now, without telling you anything about this piece made from clay, in terms of who made it or what it's called, we could start to think about some different questions that we could ask of the piece. What sort of mood do you think this figure has? What's the meaning of the color that's being used, from the blue hair to what looks like gilding and gold across the face? And why do you think the face is decorated in that way, with both words and what looks like possibly stitches? What kind of shapes, what sort of textures do you see? We might discuss this piece in terms of gender. Do you think that this is a female being represented, and what do you think that means? We might look at it culturally, in terms of society, or in terms of time period. Another piece, again, if you don't know a great deal about it, we can still begin to have a conversation with students about this piece. If you own this sculpture, where would you put it in your house and why? What title would you give it and why? What's the first thing that you notice about this piece? What do you think will happen if the two figures could move? What do you think would happen next? What sort of situation do you think this is? And a lot of the time with students, I'll get some really interesting answers, like they think perhaps this is Zeus and Athena. What do you think the top figure is thinking or feeling? Because we can't see her face as well. What kind of thoughts or feelings do you see in the face below? And questions such as these, what do you make of the colors? Because obviously we have an intentional color choice being made. Now, art as well can really raise for us some really useful comparisons for students to think about. And comparing and contrasting is something not only from the Common Core and the EdTPA, but also a really important skill in life. What makes one plan different or distinct from another? What makes one brand preferable for your purposes? What sort of distinguishes two different ideas? And so with this piece, you're looking at a fairly recent work on the left. This was featured in the Venice Biennale. It's called Fat Barbie. And what the artist shared with us was that he was trying to combine Barbie, which you see in the middle of the slide, who's sort of, in his mind, an anti-fertility figure, a figure that really is not fertile, is not motherly or maternal, and then combining it with the Venus of Willendorf, which were these archaeological finds that, we don't quite know exactly why they were made, but one of the guesses that you might imagine from looking at sort of the rounded curves of the piece is that it was referring to fertility and to motherhood and to being well-fed and able to feed others. And so he created this particular kind of piece, kind of comparing and contrasting the other two, combining them, if you will. We can also look for trends and themes. So you're going to see on the far left, Titian's Venus of Urbino. Really kind of famous piece. You may have noticed it before. And then above is Lynn Hirschman's Digital Venus. So, thinking about how has the internet changed the way that we look at people's bodies? What does it mean to think about the idea of a Venus, of a really beautiful woman in the past and today? And then you see on the bottom, Lara Croft, computer-generated drawing from the video game. So, this idea that beauty is still being pursued, but in different ways. So we can also look at art across time periods. This piece I share with you because it comes from an art education study that was done recently, where they had works of art and asked children about who they thought made it and what they thought the piece was about. And a lot of the time, children's assumptions were not accurate, but they were somewhat conventional. They were somewhat stereotyped. So kids looking at this thought, yes, this is probably created by a female. It's sort of a feminine work. It's a work that's about women's work. But then if you notice, it's actually created by a male artist. So, art can also challenge our perceptions about that. Well, why might a male artist want to do something about laundry, about dry cleaning, about women? Similarly, this piece, a lot of students assumed because of the color choices being used, because of the symbols being used, because of the scale, was created by a male artist. And yet, Betty Saar is very much a female artist. So we could think about how works like this challenge our perceptions and surprise us, and how art maybe enables us to step outside of these conventions a little bit. It's also important to consider aesthetic experience. The famous, recently, unfortunately, deceased art education theorist and researcher Elliot Eisner wrote about how when we pour our cream into our coffee, it's a beautiful moment. And sometimes you stop and notice such things. You hear the birds chirping outside, you see leaves falling, you notice someone doing something beautiful, and other times you don't. But stopping to notice is important. It's a very important skill. This is The Gates by Christo and Jean-Claude. And walking through, if any of you guys got to see it in Central Park a few years back, it gives you the sensation of almost like waking up in the morning and feeling the curtains blowing towards your face. Really interesting, luminous, kind of light, ephemeral moment. And we talked quite a bit about space, and I want to just recap that a little. When you look at a work of art, or you look at an object with students, so think about the context, right? What does the context do, and how do you establish the context? So if I'm talking about wars, if I'm talking about gender, that changes kind of the philosophical space, right? If I am showing an object or a work of art in sort of this blank background, we're able to sort of just focus on the work of art, right? This is Brancusi's The Kiss, and it's sort of one of my favorite pieces. It's a lovely little kind of funny, chubby, delightful little piece. But if we put it in a gallery like this, all of a sudden it changes a little bit. When I ask students what they see, and you might think about this a little bit, they'll tell me, oh, it's more like two people standing now. It's less like a work of art. It's more like they snuck in there to sneak a kiss. Or a gallery like this, which is obviously kind of more cluttered, more natural. Look at this and think about how it changes the piece. We could do something funny and put it into space, which again alters the piece, alters the way that we see it. I always get a little laugh on this one, right? And this is something that we're perhaps used to seeing if the piece were real, if these were actually two people. Another really important thing to keep in mind, particularly with your younger children, is that art objects do not have to be these very passive viewership experiences. So this is Edgar Degas, his piece around ballerinas, and he painted them, he sculpted them, he did tons and tons and tons and tons of ballerina work. And, we can ask students to try out the pose, to try out the gesture, try out the clothing even, to think about what would it feel like to be in this piece. And this is a great sort of activity for restless students, and just to get them thinking more about time period, about context, about experience, envisioning themselves in the future in the positions of those that we see in works of art. Even with an abstract piece like this is another Brancusi, the guy who did The Kiss that we just looked at, called Bird in Space for this one. And what he was really trying to do was lose the bird, really just get the feeling of flight. And playing around with students, I ask them to look at this, and, I get sort of maybe lackluster answers, but then I say, take your hand and trace the movement that this is making, starting from the bottom of the sculpture to the top. And you feel the sensation of flight. Try it at home if you want. You really feel that sort of sensation of arching up through the air. We also get these lovely kinds of works around gesture. This is a famous sculptor. His works can be seen at one of the museums that you have the option of visiting during this course. And just think about twisting your hand around, following with your eyes around these sculptures. It gives us a sense of undulation. It gives us a sense of twisting. And these are the sorts of things that you want kids to notice, right? And then finally, for our last slide, I want to share with you another activity that you may find really enjoyable with students, particularly in English language arts, but also in areas like science and history. So this is Leonore Finney's Red Vision, and she was an artist from Argentina who actually lost her sight for a while as a child, so she became very preoccupied with color and with using color quite expressively. And so what I often do with students, and this is a lot of fun with many different age groups, is pass out an index card, one for each student or two for each student if you prefer, and ask them to look at a piece like this and come up with the best word they can to describe the piece. And it can be any word, but you want it to epitomize or encapsulate or really describe well the piece that you're looking at. And then you collect the words that students have generated and start to talk about how you could construct a poem from these words. So if we get red and white and devil and mother and angel and dreams and doors and death, how might we assemble that into a poem? And you get sort of these lovely little lyric poems. Red devil, white angel, mother watching, doors, dream, death. And then we can have students perform them as well. It's always nice to get it read at least a couple of times. And you can do this within your various subject areas. Have them notice things like shadow if you're looking at science, umbra, penumbra. Have them notice things relating to history. Use this as a springboard for the kind of work that you're doing in your class. And with a piece like this, it's really sort of a lot of fun, and it's a great icebreaker to get kids noticing. So I really recommend it. Try it at home. Try it with a friend. Try it with your kids. I hope that you've enjoyed this a lot. Again, if this is something that you find useful in your teaching, please go over to vtshome.org so you can see more videos and examples of this work in action. See you in the next module.